Hey everybody, it is Pastor Jared here with another Teaching Tuesday. On Tuesdays during the lunch hour, I upload these short 10 to 15 minute videos that will hopefully give you something to think about, to chew on as you go about the rest of your day. Well, we have been in a conversation about the Lord's Prayer, and we're continuing that today, walking through each line, trying to unpack it a little bit. I don't know about your church, but here at Ridge, we pray the Lord's Prayer every single week together. It's a way that we end the pastoral prayer in the middle of our service. And we join together praying the prayer Jesus taught us to pray. He says it in a couple of different, it's recorded in a couple of different gospel accounts. One of my favorites comes from Matthew. The language is a little more familiar with what we do here. But it's a prayer that we join with Jesus and we join with Christians all throughout the world and throughout time. People who seek to walk in Jesus' footsteps pray this prayer that Jesus teaches us how to pray. So today, we're focusing on the line, give us this day our daily bread. I've got 3 different drawings that I want to use to try and explain it here briefly, at least from one particular angle. So, in the Gospel of Matthew, it is primarily written to Jewish people. Those who grew up studying the Hebrew Scriptures, those who were Jews, the Gospel of Matthew was especially written for them. And so when Jesus teaches that group in particular, give us this day our daily bread, man, their ears just started popping. Because Jesus was drawing from their scriptural memories of stories that they learned when they were little children, and a particular story that they remember, that they retell, and that they practice every single year. It's a story of when God delivered the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt, eventually to the Promised Land. Now, you have heard the story before. Maybe you've even seen that great old classic by Charlton Heston, The 10 Commandments. But a lot happens between the time when the people leave Egypt and until they finally arrive in the Promised Land. We're coming up on the season of Lent. It's a season of 40 days that reminds us of the 40 years God's people spent in the wilderness. Now, anybody who's gone on a long car ride, especially with little ones, know how quickly we can start complaining. Are we there yet? Are we there yet? I'm hungry. I'm thirsty. I have to go to the bathroom. I mean, there is just complaint after complaint, want after want on any car ride or travel. The same was true with the Israelites. Not very long into their journey, they started complaining and they started misremembering the ways that they used to have it. They thought way back when was better than today. Hello. Aren't we all kind of prone to thinking that, or misremembering our history, thinking it used to be better than it actually was? Well, for the Israelites, they started whining to their leader Moses, saying how, back in Egypt, we got to eat pots full of meat and our bellies were always full. And they were whining and complaining because traveling in the wilderness, they didn't have much to eat. So God responded to their cries and to their complaints by sending them every single day quail and bread from heaven. They looked at the bread, though, one morning and said, "What is this stuff? Manna." "It's the daily bread," Moses told them. In fact, he goes on to say that every single person in the Israelite camp should go and gather as much as they need, enough to last them for the day. And then on the days before their Sabbath rest, they were supposed to gather double. He gave very strict instructions. Gather enough daily bread for your day, for you and yours to have enough. No one, Moses instructed them, is to keep any of it until the next day. However, the story in Exodus chapter 16 tells us some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until the next morning, but they found that it was filled with maggots. The people were supposed to trust God, that God would give them enough for their next day and their next day and their next day. God literally gave them their day, daily bread. When Jesus was teaching his disciples to pray this prayer, they would have remembered this story about how long ago God's people were invited to trust that God would provide for their every need, their daily need, that God would hear them and that God would provide. They remembered that part of the lesson, and they also would have remembered the second part, that they weren't supposed to overindulge, that they weren't supposed to hoard, that to be a follower of this kingdom was to trust that God would give them enough, and in so doing that they did not need to overindulge or to take more so that others might have less. No, when they heard this part of Jesus' prayer, they would have been challenged and convicted in the same way that you and I would do well to be challenged by today. The question behind the prayer is, how much is enough? How much is enough for you and for yours? This is picture number 3. How much is enough? Enough for you to make sure that you and yours have enough of your daily bread, to make sure that you and yours have your needs supplied for so that you don't have to go and beg or borrow from somebody else. How are you doing at making sure that your cup is full? When the Israelites went out to gather, some people gathered more because they had bigger families or bigger appetites. Others gathered less because it was maybe just 1, 2, or they weren't as hungry that day. The Bible says that there was enough for them, whether they gathered a whole bunch of food or just a little bit. They gathered enough for their daily bread. Again, what is enough for you and for yours? There is a passage, Psalm 23, that toward the end of it says, "My cup runneth over." That God not only blessed the psalmist with enough to fill the psalmist's cup, but even more to the point where the cup began to overflow. You see, sometimes for each of us, our daily bread might look like a tiny chalice. For others, like me and my family, we've got 4 little growing children. There's 6 of us in our household. Our cup is not a chalice. It's kind of like a big old pitcher. We need a little extra to make sure that us and ours are provided for. Our daily bread, our grocery bill is increasing as these kids get older and bigger and keep growing. But for others, it might be just a little bit. When the psalmist says, "My cup runneth over," and when Jesus prays, "Give us enough," or "Give us this day our daily bread," implicit within the prayer, within the song, within the story of the Israelites in the Exodus, is not only how much is enough, but then what are you doing with the extra? What are you doing with the extra? For many of us, we might find ourselves hoarding more than we need, spending a little extra than our daily bread, thinking more about the extras in our lives than making sure that others' cups are full and filled. You know, there's an interesting tension point as we think about this prayer applied to the national, or rather the global economies of this world. Right now, we start hearing more and more smaller and poorer countries talking to countries like ours, asking for their help in acquiring the vaccines, saying that until the whole world is vaccinated, there'll still be a threat to the whole world. How might our country apply this Christian principle for a Christian nation with respect to vaccinations and helping make sure that others in our country and around the world who aren't as fortunate or don't have as good of access to vaccinations get theirs? That's one way to think about this from an economic, or rather from a global scale. How might it be for you locally, for us here in our own community, for you and for yours? when you have your daily bread and you've got extra, what are you going to do with it? So my family and I started thinking about this question last night around the dinner table. We periodically, on our better days, and I'll just tell you, a lot of times we don't do it for lots of reasons, but on our better days, we do a daily prayer. It follows the Book of Common Prayer for Ordinary Radicals. It's a free app that we have on our phone. It's also a hard copy book that we own, and there's a website that you can go to, Common Prayer. Last night, the conversation was provoked by a prayer that we prayed. We are happy to be your children, O Lord. Make us happier still to extend your table. We are happy to be your children, O Lord. Make us happier still to extend your table. So here's what we're thinking. As we think about just ways we could practically start applying this, I'm not just thinking about our souls or all getting all spiritually here. I'm just thinking like pragmatically, how can we live in the footsteps of Jesus? And here's what we came up with. In the past couple years, we've enjoyed learning how to make sourdough bread. This isn't just a COVID thing, although there are a lot of people who learned how to bake bread in this past year. We've been doing it for a number of years now. It's fun, it's delicious, and it makes our house smell really warm. But whenever we make sourdough bread, we always make 2 loaves because the recipe is large and we've got 2 Dutch ovens, and our family, like I said, is growing and we eat more bread. 2 loaves gets devoured very quickly. But one of the ways that we're going to start thinking about not just our daily bread, but the extra, instead of hoarding it and eating it all for ourselves, we're going to start delivering some to our neighbors. 1 loaf a week we'll eat, 1 loaf we'll deliver to our neighbors. We're still new enough in our community that we don't know all of our neighbors' names and we haven't met them all, but just on our street alone, we might try to extend the table, to use that prayer, by delivering a loaf of bread. Sometimes this can look like a big, life-changing thing, just to make sure that your cup is filled. Other times, it might just be a little small thing, like delivering last year's coat you don't wear anymore to our church so that we can make sure it gets delivered to folks who don't have a warm coat, especially in this freezing season. Maybe it's delivering a loaf of bread. Maybe it's writing a card to a shut-in. I don't know what it is for you, but I know that God knows. And the challenge of today's prayer is how much is enough for you and yours. Then, what are you going to do with the extra? May God burden you with that question until you, with God, find an answer that's concrete, practical, and something you can do this week. Until next time, may God give us this day our daily bread, and through us make sure that others have enough for theirs as well. I'm Pastor Jared, and together we are Ridge. Have a great day.